Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Stephanie Stanov. I'm a program coordinator here at Park People. And so for those of you who are a little less familiar with Park People, we're a national charity dedicated to supporting and mobilizing people to help them activate the power of parks in their cities to improve quality of life in cities across Canada. I'm also a coordinator for TD Friends the Environment Foundation in Ontario. So I'm seeing a lot of familiar names and excited to start to put some faces to those names. We're happy to welcome you to today's event and to share ideas and concepts, key questions, tips and tricks to broaden your toolkit and help you make the most of technology and bring your nature-based and environmental programming online. And with that, let me introduce you to Kelsey Carrier, Senior Project Manager at Park People, to begin today's workshop.
Hello, welcome all, and thank you so much for joining us today. I would like to begin today's gathering by first expressing our deepest gratitude to the land for providing for us and to all of the First Nations who stewarded this land and the water for millennia and welcomed us to this land. We recognize the enduring presence and resilience of First Nations, Inuit and Métis people on this land, and we recognize their role as caregivers, stewards, and storytellers across Turtle Island. We recognize that you're all joining us from different parts of the land we now call Canada. So we invite you to take a moment in the chat window and let us know which nation's territory you are visiting us from. Included in the chat window a link to nativeland.ca where you can find out. We know how important it is for all of us to be connected to the land. It's pivotal to the work that we do. And we certainly recognize the challenge of doing this in meaningful ways when we can't gather in person in our lands. So we have brought together some amazing educators and conveners today to share their experiences. And with that, I would like to welcome Emma Rooney from Blooming Caravan.
Hello, everyone. It was pretty neat to see all the different weather experiences that people are having across the country. Quick question for you, and there's no judgment here, but how many of you had to check on your phones for the weather reports? You can give me a wave. I gotta make sure I can see that. Give me a wave, or you can use the reactions and give us a thumbs up if you had to check on your phone for the weather before answering the question. No thumbs up? Oh, wow, this is a pretty good group. And how many of you had the opportunity to quickly check a window for what was going on out there before you responded? So you all just knew what was going on, which is great. I know that just as everyone was stocking up on toilet paper, I went out and bought a little thermometer for my window because I definitely had the sense that I was going to be spending a fair amount of time inside, and I needed to give myself an excuse to get up and look out the window and see what was going on. And I love this picture. I don't know where it's from. It just kind of appeared online, as sometimes magical things do. But I think for many of us, we're not, when we're thinking about our social bubbles, we're not including the land. Or, you know, when we're joining a webinar, we don't have that close interaction with the land that this individual in the picture is able to have. And it's easy to become very disconnected even when we're talking about environmental issues. So I'll give you an example. I was recently able to join a wonderful call from an environmental group that's outside of my neighborhood. And actually it was a program that was specifically designed for young people, but because they were doing it online, they were able to open it up. And I was feeling super privileged to be hearing an Indigenous elder talk about water and just thinking, oh, this is so neat. One of the silver linings of this experience is that I'm able to participate in something like this. And as we were talking about water, the clouds changed and all of a sudden there was one of those flash storms happening right outside my window. I live on the lower level, and all of a sudden there was like huge amounts of water coming in. Massive oak tree fell on top of a car, but everything on the screen stayed exactly the same. The facilitator had this gorgeous background showing the galaxy, and we were talking about water, and I really just kind of wanted to jump in there and say, hey, is anyone else experiencing this massive storm? So I think sometimes even when we're talking about environmental topics, it's really easy to get far, far away and be floating out in space rather than connecting with the land. So there are some very simple steps that we can take as facilitators that aren't going to correct that situation, but can maybe draw people's attention to the land when they're joining in on the call. So simple things like inviting them to take a few minutes away from their computer to go and look out the window, or asking them about the weather in the area so we can get a sense that people in different areas, or asking people to identify or to turn towards a specific land feature. Could be a lake, for example, or a major body of water. And even if they don't know, it can kind of spark that little bit of curiosity about the land that they're in. So these are just some simple ideas, but one of the key takeaways that I hope that you keep with you today is what are ways that we can keep land visible while working online? And I'm sure for many of you, when you created your proposals, you had a particular piece of land in mind, right? You most likely weren't planning to do 100% of your programming online. So how can you keep that piece of land in mind as you're making the transition? So for just 1 second, I invite you to close your eyes, or just think for 1 second that you have this beautiful bubble of land around you. And that bubble is unique to you. And what is it that you see in that land bubble? If you take a nice deep breath, what is it that you smell in that land bubble? Are there other creatures that you're sharing that land bubble with? What are the sounds that you're hearing? Perhaps you're able to reach out, and what features in the land are you able to touch? If you have your eyes closed, you can open them up. And I just invite you to keep that image of the land with you as we move through the presentation today. Slide. So perhaps with all the craziness that's going on right now, you start to think, oh, I need to take a course on environmental education so that I can, figure out how to do this online thing. And I'm here to tell you today that you don't need that. You were all successful with your proposals. There's just a wealth of knowledge and experience in the room with environmental education and engaging people. But we do want to keep those frameworks in mind. So this is a really simple way of looking at it, where you're thinking about moving people from awareness, which is that information piece, to concern, which you might think of as empathy, and then to experience. And probably your proposals, maybe they focused on one of these things more than the other, but they probably were working with a combination because you knew you wanted to create an engaging program for your participants. Obviously, in the online world, it's easier to focus on the environmental awareness piece, on the information piece. And that's kind of in the very, very early programs I went online. Those were sort of the first types of programs that we saw. So I just want you to keep in mind today, how do we bring environmental concern, environmental experience into our online platforms? Next slide. So this is another way of looking at it. And actually, one of my mentors from the Pine Project, Chris, he shared this right at the beginning of the pandemic on a Zoom call. And I thought it was just a really interesting way to think about it. So a lot of our programs are very immersive, and we're thinking about using all the senses and building nature connection as a way to impact environmental change. And for many people, nature connection starts with nature recreations. That can be a program where you're going for a walk, and during that walk program experience, you start to notice different things and get curious about perhaps the birds that you see, and you want some more nature information, and you maybe start taking out books or seeking out that information. And from there, you're developing a closer connection with the land. And it's something, that connection and those different pieces are things that you notice every day in your day-to-day once that change has come about. And it's not something that changes with the pandemic. That nature connection is always there. But the deep nature connection that we're often striving for with our programs, those are things that require, or often require, mentors and practice. And it's not something that we're going to be able to accomplish in a single Zoom call. So often when we're talking about online programming, we're seeing the nature information part. And what we want to start thinking about today is how can we more fully encompass all the different components of nature connection. Another way to remember it, this might be the easiest, is that we're having a combination of head, which is the thinking part, heart, which is the empathy and the feeling part, and hands, which is the doing part. And all of you probably had many of these different things in your proposals, and you use these different frameworks on a regular basis. And what I want to encourage you today is to think about those again, and think about how they can be incorporated into the work that you're going to be doing online. We're not here to tell you that every single thing can be incorporated and that there aren't going to be challenges, but to give you confidence that you know what you're doing and you have all those things in your back pocket that you can go back to at this moment in time. Okay, so we're going to have you fill out a poll here. You should see it pop up on your screen. We want to get a sense of how you're feeling, and it's okay to be totally honest. Nobody's going to see who said what. Cool, cool. I'm seeing I'm confident that there is a benefit. Keep pushing up, that's great. There's the still I'm resisting feeling, which I really appreciate that honesty, because I know it resonates with many of us. And I've seen it work, it's great. So there are some of you that are ready to do this, or you've already been doing this, and that's awesome as well. And I'm coming around as a growing group in this webinar today, so that's great. Thank you everyone for participating. So definitely the clear winner is I'm confident that there is a benefit. So that's an awesome place for us to start. I do wonder if we'd asked you a couple of weeks ago how you would have felt, but I suspect many of you have had positive experiences. And when we've had positive experiences, it's easier for us to make the transition. So that's great to see. So for me at the beginning of the pandemic, I had a ton of books from the library, and I was thinking, oh, okay, great, I don't have to return these, so I'm going to be doing a ton of learning, and you know, I thought it was a great opportunity to do that learning. But very quickly, I realized I was going to be very busy dealing with the participants that I deal with on a daily basis. So I work as a horticultural therapist in long-term care homes with older adults. And my role is to bring nature and gardening activities to those residents. And what you see a picture of here is my cart. And that's because I've already realized that it's difficult for everyone to get outside, especially in winter, but you know, even when the weather is good, and it's also difficult to even get people to our indoor gardening areas. So I know my audience really well, and I've put all sorts of things that are going to engage people's interests. We've got bits of greenery and to help us learn about tree identification. And we've even got seeds on the cart and stones. And I'm taking this into everyone's room, and I'm feeling like I understand my audience and I've been able to adapt my programs. This is in January, this little cart. By early March, I'm beginning to get signals that I have to think carefully about what I'm putting on that cart, because I'm going to have to be able to clean the surfaces on a regular basis. So all of a sudden I'm putting more books, less plants, and things that I can easily wipe down. A little bit later in March, I still have the cart, but now I'm telling people, oh, you can't touch the cart. So they're really having to rely on me talking about things to animate things versus people being able to have that physical contact and touch things. And by the end of March, it's a completely different experience. The cart is locked up and I'm not even able to go into work. And so you see here on the side, it says, trust in the tools you already have. That's absolutely not how I felt. I felt a lot more like crying and sort of, I always tell people that my work is really easy because the plants are the ones that do the hard work. And now there are no plants, there's just me. And in situations where I'm super lucky, I'm able to connect with residents by phone or using WhatsApp or FaceTime, and staff on the inside are able to help me do that. But I have to admit, the first couple of conversations like this are an absolute disaster. People may not be able to hear properly, they may not be able to see me on the screen, and we've got no point of connection. And like many situations at this time, there weren't opportunities to learn how to adapt our programs for online. Kind of having to figure that out on my own. The only type of programming there was to think about online for me and the staff in our facility was end-of-life programming. So we were having lots of celebrations of life that were having to take place online because family members weren't able to be with their loved ones at the end. And in that session, where we were getting training on how to do this, we all admitted as facilitators that we felt very disconnected. And the facilitator said, okay, look around you. Doesn't matter what it is. If you have a rock, hold on to it. If you don't have a rock, look for something else. Maybe you have a stick, or maybe it's a wooden pencil. Maybe that's the only thing that you've got, but hold on to something. Give yourself a grounding object. And when we did that, for that moment, we all felt like we had been able to enter the same place. And we weren't floating in this virtual world, but there was something that gave us that connection to the earth that we needed. And this wasn't an environmental program, but it was really powerful. And it's something that I've been using ever since in offering it to myself as a facilitator, but also with the folks that I'm working with to try and give us that moment where we're grounded. And I'm not here to tell you that you have to do that, but I am here to remind you that we all have things in our toolbox that we can draw upon, even if they seem completely irrelevant at this moment in time. Actually, the rock that I'm talking about is in the picture on the cart. So it was something that I was using already, but now it found a new purpose. So that's one of the second takeaways for today, is really trust in the tools that you already have and all that amazing work that you've been doing. So we really hope that this workshop will give you confidence and inspiration to move your programming online. Obviously, a lot of you are feeling positive already, which is great, and we hope this will take you to the next level. Give you some experience using simple video call tools. Perhaps you've had positive experiences, but now it's an opportunity to break those down a little bit. You're going to leave with some key questions to guide your program design, specifically the programs that you had proposed, some facilitation techniques, and some opportunities to learn from each other, which I think are really key, because as I said a few times, there's a lot of great knowledge in the room. So the big conundrum, I don't think I have to spell it out anymore, is how do we use technology to help people connect with nature? It may seem counterintuitive. Many of us are getting on board, but how do we do it well? And we're not here to leave with you with a sense today that this is always easy and that all of the work you were doing before translates. It's okay if it doesn't, but let's think about what we can do to move forward at this particular moment in time. These are the top challenges that we heard from you in the pre-registration survey, and I'm sure they'll resonate for all of you. So the technical learning curve, access to technology. So access to technology has never been equal, but I think the pandemic has made that more clear than ever. Incorporating outdoor, immersive, nature-based opportunities. So, so many of our proposals include really deep sensory activities with nature connection. And it's really difficult to do that online. And then, I don't know if this would have been here if we had asked you a while ago, but definitely there's the feeling of screen fatigue and keeping up engagement levels. How long we're going to have to keep doing this? I didn't like this at the beginning. I feel like I'm just, I got into it, but how much longer am I going to keep going? One of the ones that we didn't see that much in the survey, but I'll just mention it in case it's on your mind, is issues around privacy. I know some of you work with children or older adults, and privacy and safety has definitely been a big learning curve in this journey, and I think it continues to be something that we have to keep in mind as a challenge. Oh, this is just a little tip we'll throw in here. Take advantage of your pre-registration to get this type of information. It will always help in guiding your online programming, and it'll give you a real sense of what's going on in the room.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So I wanted to address specifically one of the major challenges that, that a lot of you recognized, which is keeping people engaged. When they're staring at screens, especially young people, often it's a one-way conversation, and it's hard to maintain that interest and lose people if they're breaking people into small groups and engaging them in conversation that way is an ideal way to keep people engaged. And we just wanted to introduce you to a simple tool, if you haven't already discovered it, on the platform that we're using today, which is Zoom. And on this platform, it's called Breakout Rooms. Other platforms have similar functionality, but it's great for small group activities. You can pre-arrange your breakout rooms according to registration questions, which we'll explain all in the toolkit that we'll share with you at the end of today. But basically, if it would be beneficial to you to have specific groups, different activities separated by age group, or different themes or topics that people are interested in, or to create diversity in your groups, these are all things that you can arrange, pre-arrange using registration questions. But for now, what we're going to do is break you all up into groups of 3. And we want you to just take a moment when we get there into the breakout rooms, unmute yourselves, introduce yourselves to each other, and think about an event or program that you will be delivering in the near future, and something that you've been struggling with about in terms of moving it online. Thinking about your audience and the goals and the original intention of this event. So for those of you that are new to this experience, it's a little bit like a time warp. And I am going to, one second, I'm just getting into groups of 3, and you guys ready for the time warp? When you get to the other side, unmute yourselves and introduce yourselves. And we will give you 2 minutes each for each of 3 people, and we'll see you back here in 6 minutes. All right, enjoy. Thanks for going through that experiment with us. It really, for those of you who are new to breakout rooms, thumbs up if that's your first experience with that. Yeah? And it's amazing how completely different it is from a webinar where you're just an audience member. It sort of is the digital equivalent of going from a presenter on a stage to a workshop room where people can engage in small conversations and really learn from each other's experience. So if you could, whoever you chose to write in the chat window, if you could just take a quick moment to let us know something that you all had in common or something that, that sparked in your conversation, and share it in the chat window. And I myself am actually very new to the whole online programming. 4 months ago, I had never even heard of Zoom or any of these online platforms, but we've all been quickly thrown into the learning curve, and that's what we're here to share with you today, to help sort of flatten that learning curve as we're growing your capacity, giving you a whole new spread of tools, and how to play with them. So the breakout rooms can be used for all kinds of things, from dividing up your audience into, if you want to make sure you have diverse voices in each group, you can use your registration tools to divide up and make diverse groups. You can do random groups of any size or number, and allow people to engage in smaller conversations. So we acknowledge the challenges, and we wanted to give you a moment to sort of get that off your chest, and then bring you back to another bit of information that you shared with us in the registration, which is some of the silver linings that those of us who have had the opportunity to switch online already are starting to discover. So with that, I'll pass it back to Emma.
Okay. So as Kelsey just mentioned, these are some of the opportunities that were highlighted in the survey. So broaden the reach. I've heard lots of groups talk about they're no longer bound by geography at this moment in time, and they're quite excited about the prospect of being able to increase their participation. It is an opportunity, or it can be an opportunity, to go beyond the usual suspects and perhaps reach people that are more comfortable online. We will talk a little bit later, but there are some drawbacks to that as well. Reduced time commitment, travel barriers of participation. I'm sure many of us are feeling that if you're working from home. Easier, it has the potential of being easier and cheaper to bring in experts. And easier to provide content in different languages. So we've heard a lot about the barriers, the accessibility barriers with online programming, but I think it's great to see ones like this about it being easier to offer programs in different languages. So with all this excitement, I also think that the pandemic has really heightened our awareness of how much people are longing for nature connection. People are using it more than ever as a strategy for coping. They're turning to their parks. And we want to get on board and get super excited. But one of the things that can happen is we transition so quickly to moving our programs online that we completely lose the original intention that we so carefully crafted in our proposals, or perhaps it's like the mission of our organization. We see other interesting online programming happening and we try to replicate it. And in that process, we lose the original idea. So one of the things we want you to think about today is, what was one of your goals with your proposal? What was that audience that you were intending to reach? What experiences were you, deciding were important to provide that audience? Often the experiences that you picked were based on your deep knowledge of the community. And what were the outcomes that you had? So it's not that you're not going to have to transform these things, but we want to make sure you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater at this moment in time, this very special moment in time, and that you refocus on these things. And what you're really going to be considering when you're focusing on these things is, how do these things translate online? How can I still reach the same audience and my goals? And you're going to adapt those things. And then there's going to be some things that it's not going to be possible, and you're going to have to seek out an extension to be able to do it at a later time. Or maybe it's going to be a combination of that.
So we wanted to acknowledge that there are so many different kinds of events that you all would have been planning or have done historically, are experts at, that may or may not be an obvious transition to bringing it online. We would have volunteer engagement events, trainings, gatherings, educational events, celebrations, tours, planning meetings, children's programming, public events, environmental stewardship. So if we look at all those on the next slide all together, we can see that there are 3 varying approaches to bringing all these wild array of events online in different ways. So we can look at it in 3 different ways that are not mutually exclusive and can actually be best thought of in ways of creative layering them. So one is what we're doing today. It's a live online event where you're gathering people in a timely fashion. You want them to be able to connect, you want them to be able to respond and to engage with each other. We'll look at some of the pros and cons of each of these in a moment, but basic concept of that one is that it does definitely require stable internet connections across the board for all of the participants and organizers. Then we have sort of looking at a lower bandwidth options is online content. So this can be anything from blogs, video series, online toolkits and resources that you're able to share, recordings of live events that people are able to watch at their leisure, that it's not essential that they were signed on at the moment of the event. And then we also want to look at offline options where people are able to step aside from their computers, either because of technology, lack of access to technology, or learning curve with it, or because we're really trying to engage people in activities that don't involve staring at a screen. So we'll dive a little deeper into each of these in the next slide. As we look at online, live online, this is obviously great for things like webinars where people want to be able to have a question and answer live with the panelists, and for the panelists to be able to play off each other. For gatherings or meetings like we're doing today, where people have an opportunity to converse in smaller groups. And trainings where you're going to want people to be able to ask questions and really sort of familiarize themselves and respond back and forth. And also for celebrations, because watching a video of a celebration is not the same as actually being together. When we look at things on online content elements, these are things like if you want to create a series of lessons or tutorials, a series of webcasts, or perhaps even a tour that it's really important that your participants are engaged in a place-based element, but that place-based space might not have the internet or data capacity to reliably hold an online event there. So that could be a really good, a good way to think about sharing sort of place-based events. And then offline, we can think of things like activity kits that we're sending out to people, phone trees of connecting and sharing information and checking in and getting responses from folks who aren't connected online, listservs and WhatsApp groups that are sort of meeting people on the platforms that they already use without taking the leap into a whole nother realm of a technological learning curve. And so, like I said, we'll talk about this more, but these are not meant to be mutually exclusive, but we'll explore with you ways to layer them going ahead. And at this moment, I would actually love to introduce to you Minaz Asani, who is the manager of outreach here at Park People, who has just taken our whole Sparking Change program online over the last few months, bringing active members of the neighborhood improvement areas onto online platforms to continue their community engagement programming there. So let me pass the mic over to Minaz.
Hello everyone, nice to see you all online. I'm happy to share this information with you because in March we had no idea what we were going to do. So at Park People, all the work we do is in parks, and we're encouraging people to use outdoor spaces as community. And so when COVID happened and the idea of doing online sessions was like, oh my God, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? The program that I work on is called Sparking Change, and it is our work in underserved communities in Toronto. And the neighborhood improvement areas are 31 specific neighborhoods in Toronto where there is specific programming and more resources put towards helping those underserved communities. So this year we've had funding for 7 years to do this program. The first 4 years was funding from TD, and these 3 years have been from OTF. So when COVID happened in March, our funder, the Ontario Trillium Foundation, came to us and said, do you want to make changes to the program, or do you want to defer the program to next year? And our dilemma was that this is the last year of the program, and if we deferred it to next year, that would just hold back all the other funding that we had and changes we had for the program. So we decided we were going to pivot, and so we had, I think we had maybe a week or 2 weeks at the most to change this $150,000 program. And so we basically, we made it an online program, and we're like, how are we going to do this? So with the on-the-ground program, what we did was give communities $2,000 to do 3 events in parks and provide a lot of on-the-ground support. So we decided, and a lot of capacity building for these groups as well. So we decided we would do weekly online sessions. So they wouldn't have to do any park programming as long as there were restrictions in place. And we would go in 2-month chunks. So we'd see what happened in the first 2 months. So that was April, May, June, July, and then August, September. And so we'd go 2 months by 2 months and make a plan. If COVID continued and restrictions were in place, and if things opened up. Like what were the choices for the communities? So the first 2 months we did, over the first 4 months, we planned like weekly sessions. Every week we had sessions for the group. So we have 10 groups that we're funding this year, giving them funding this year, but we've got a group of about 90 groups that we support. And so we'd have 2 different sessions. So one was a Zoom meetups, which was for the smaller groups. And this was so we could have interaction with them. And for the bigger groups, we would do webinars. So just providing information through that platform. And we also found out early on that we had to switch the times for the session. So one week we'd have to do the afternoon. So people that had children and had to put them to bed or worked in the evenings could do an afternoon session. And then we also had to do an evening session the following week. So people that worked during the day could attend the evening session. So that was early learnings for us, like making that switch. So what did we do in the weekly sessions? What did we do every week? The advantage of this, that we could bring people in that we hadn't been able to bring in the past through workshops because of the distance or because they had other commitments. This was an easy way, like, you know, you have a 1-hour session, somebody comes in for 10 or 15 minutes, does their thing and then leaves and does it from the comfort of their home. So that was really important. And we started looking around of who we could bring to do sessions. One of the things we wanted to do was in these underserved communities, there wasn't anything happening. So people just weren't going out, you know, they weren't putting the pictures of rainbows in their windows. They weren't doing any of that. So there was no interaction. So who could we bring in? What artists could we bring in that could talk about some of these things that are happening in other communities? And so we had a variety of things. That was one of them. We also wanted to build their capacity. So, you know, how do we teach them how to advocate for themselves? So write to their counselors about what's happening in their community, or contact the park supervisors, get to know these people that they wouldn't usually get to know. And so those were the kinds of things we did. We were able to get like artists come in from different organizations or individuals to do presentations. We get able to get like different environmental groups. One session we did the iNaturalist program, which we would never have done if we just had the underground program. So we had somebody come in from our Vancouver office and talk about what iNaturalist is and how groups could go out on their own and use this app and to learn about nature and to engage in nature. So that with one of the groups, that was a huge success, and they continue to use iNaturalist. I heard you guys talking. So what was it like? Because this was also, like Kelsey said, like we had never used these platforms before and done online programming. Park People was all about getting people into the outdoors. And so we obviously made lots of mistakes in the beginning, like the whole technical thing was new to us and was new to our communities. We had to do sessions with the groups that were coming on, with some of them that just weren't technically savvy. And so had to bring them on. And I have to tell you that those people are some of now the most engaged people and are teaching other people how to use Zoom and other technical platforms. So they were very forgiving of our mistakes, and they also gave us feedback. So that helped us improve as we went week to week. And the sessions were really geared to their needs. So finding out what is it that they want to learn, and then curating these sessions based on what it was that they wanted. What we learned, and I think Emma talked about some of this stuff, is when you take travel out of the equation, you get greater participation. It's so much easier to get up in your pajamas and sit in front of the computer than it is to get dressed and get on a bus and go across town. So no lugging on our part. It was like we didn't have to lug like tons of stuff, like bring all our cutlery and our dishes and order food and all that stuff and give out tokens. So the cost was also it was much cheaper. And you can actually do more. What I found is you can actually do more through these sessions than you can if you were having a workshop, and easy to add stuff on as well at the last minute if you've forgotten to do stuff. So I want to talk about one. I think Emma talked about some, that's the silver lining of this. And I want to talk about one really silver lining that would never have happened if we hadn't gone online, if we didn't have these sessions. So we started hearing from communities in these underserved communities that their situation was very different from what the situation in well-served community was. So if you're from Toronto, a Trinity Bellwoods versus, Scarlet Wood, like a served and an underserved community. And, I talked about how there weren't people like running to parks in these underserved communities. We also asked them in Toronto, they've opened up these streets, they've opened up the lakeshore for people to ride their bikes and to walk and that sort of thing. And so we brought it to them and we asked them, this is happening in a community downtown. How do you feel about it? Would you, it's not happening in your community. Would you like this to be happening in their community? And they're like, no. They're like, we want more gardens in our community. Our people are hungry. We don't need wider streets. In fact, if the street was closed in our community, how would we drive to places? Because that's the main mode of transportation. So that was a real eye-opener for us, and we would never have known that. It was just because we were in this situation, and when things were happening in other parts of the cities, we wanted to find out what's happening in these communities. And so we took that information back to Park People. And our managers didn't really know that this was happening in other parts of the cities. You heard about the circles at Trinity Bellwoods, and you heard about, the lakeshore closing down, and that got a lot of press. But what's happening in underserved communities didn't get a lot of press. And based on that information, we applied for a grant to bring out people into parks in underserved communities. And literally, this proposal was a 3-paragraph proposal to this funder. And they gave us the money for it to do this program. So that was really the silver lining for us, is some of these things, some of these situations that are happening in these communities are coming to the surface because of COVID and because we're having more of these conversations online. So I'll just end by saying that I know your programs, a lot of the TDFEF programs are outdoors. In fact, all of them are, that's why you got the funding for it. That there is real opportunity. We are actually so I was just on another call before this with the 5 people that we have now hired from that funding that we got. And these 5 people are from underserved communities. They were volunteers in the communities, and now we're paying them to come up with ideas of what would work in their communities. This is all new for us. This is like a complete 180 degrees to the work that we were doing. But it has been because we've had these online sessions and we've been able to have conversations in different ways that we've ever had before. And so think of these sessions of working in a different way, asking different questions, finding out what are the gaps in normal times and how they could be filled in this time. So I think that's it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Minaz, for sharing your story and for, you know, not only helping us see the silver lining of getting online and getting communities online, but to really recognize this sort of moment of necessity as an opportunity to really address issues that have been under-acknowledged and to sort of bring them to the forefront of our work. We've been talking a little bit internally about the idea of mission drift and how, you know, maybe you're struggling with the idea of bringing programming online because it's a bit of a stray from the work that you do that's dedicated to getting youth outdoors. But obviously we're in unprecedented circumstances, and we've seen many, many, many circumstances of funders being incredibly receptive to us going back and sort of revisiting those basic goals and outcomes of our programs, which is, you know, youth being engaged or connecting people or growing in awareness. And those are some things that we can address and acknowledge online, and even bring other issues to the surface in the process. So let's just dive one little step deeper with these three aspects of online programming that we're looking at. So looking at live online programming, like we said, which is what we're doing today, it's fantastic for connecting people, for offering shared learning and providing social connection. We are finding lots of people in very isolated situations. The obvious cons of that is that it's focusing more and more on screen time. Though, like we said about layering the approaches, that there is an opportunity to actually use this connective time to encourage more off-screen time through pre-activities or follow-ups, and that the online time is a moment to share the experiences that people have been encouraged to have offline. Some things to think about is the access that your audience will have to devices and or internet connection, participant comfort with events being recorded, and or engaging personally, depending on the group. It's just something to consider as to whether or not you record, whether or not you encourage video, whether you make a point of arranging the event so that people can tune in by phone. And it really does require engaging facilitation. You want to make sure that you've chosen the right people that can tell an engaging story and enjoys playing with the tools in a way that is going to keep the audience in a participatory mode. And looking specifically at the Zoom format, which is what we're using as an experience today, there's both meeting or webinar options that have their own sort of set of potential, which we'll share with you in our toolkit at the end, depending on the kind of event that you wish to host. So there's a whole array of platforms for online programming. When we pulled you guys at the registration, these were some of the ones that you said that you were using. Zoom is definitely the most familiar to a lot of people, but through schools or different institutional platforms, we find you know, GoToMeetings or WebEx or Google Meets or Google Classroom kind of floating to the surface. And then again, along the idea of meeting people where they are. If people are already connected with their community through Facebook or through WhatsApp, we find other social media platforms really useful for connecting with people, and perhaps using that as a segue to bring them on board to other platforms as well. So looking at online content, the pros are that it's always available. It's easily shareable. People don't have to worry about having missed the event. And it makes for a great resource wherever you are storing your resources, whether you have a website or through your Facebook page. You're sort of creating a library of these great resources that people can refer to again and again and again. So that's a really fantastic option of creating online content that really can be better suited if you're dealing with bandwidth or lack of access to technology. The cons we see with this is that people don't get that person-to-person interaction in the same way, and it's again more screen time. You also don't have oversight of an active facilitator of seeing how people are engaging and what they're getting out of it, because it has that sort of one-way learning element to it, no matter how wonderful and engaging your presenters might be. And so things to think about is, the technical know-how. Say you're doing a recording, making sure that you've got someone on your team that could be reaching out beyond your staff. It could be, someone's son or daughter who's at home, who knows their technology, can help share things on social media, knows how to record things, knows how to edit a video. And also making sure that you find really engaging presenters. And then finally, looking at offline aspects, there's a real opportunity to reach less internet connected communities. And it's a really interesting sort of array of activities to bring in conjunction with the other online gatherings that we've been discussing. It also really encourages family time, or allows for people to participate in their own style, on their own, in their own time, and not be overwhelmed with engaging in person during a live event. Again, we lack that social connectivity aspect of it, but that you can definitely make up for that in the quality of the experience with the activity. So things, for example, like a drawing activity, or sending kits, growing kits with instructions out to people's houses in advance. Considerations you'd want to think about are the cost of using actually hard materials again, instead of just discussing and showing things online. The safety of delivering, like the physical delivery process, and then just the logistics of materials, how to get things to people, what to know, what people might have on hand, and what you can't assume and that you might want to provide for people. And it does bring up another interesting consideration about how do you track participation? If people are doing these activities on their own, how do you know what their experience was, or how many people actually did it? So this is another place where you'd like to layer some sort of follow-up elements to have people perhaps, gather and share what they worked on, or to send in a photo. It could be as simple as sending in a photo to a WhatsApp group or a Facebook page. So with that, we wanted to take one more step forward and look at ways to make sort of a more wholesome experience out of, starting from the idea of one event. So in advance of your event, you can pose a pre-gathering activity that people will engage in. Maybe that's some reading in advance. Maybe it's an actual activity, encouraging people to go outside and go to a particular kind of place and reflect on something. It could be a simple grounding activity to connect them to the space. Through the registration process, we've mentioned that you can really take advantage of that opportunity, because people aren't going to come to the event without registering. So you have this golden moment to ask some key information, and you think about, do I really need age, gender, ethnicity? Or are there some really interesting questions you could ask to help understand who you managed to reach out to, or specific questions you want to ask about that will help you shape the program itself, and help you figure out how to engage with them or design breakout rooms or specific activities, that kind of thing. And then there's the idea of sending out kits, supply lists, or instructions in advance. So during your event, you have all these great tools like we've made use of today, putting things in the chat window, conducting polls, letting people out into breakout rooms. And these aren't all just for conversations. They can be used for activities and all kinds of events. You can host a hands-on activity while people are gathered. And also it's important to provide a moment for people to step away from their computer for a minute, especially if you want them to reflect on something and then come back and engage. And it's also very useful to do follow-ups post-event. Can be by email, can be sending a survey, or turning your event into a series. And so the other aspect of these add-ons is thinking about your reporting and your evaluation, which I know is a big part of working with a funder, is that this thinking about this in advance can give you some really interesting opportunities to find out who your audience is. Did you manage to reach out to the types of people that you know that your program was intended for? And if not, you can watch that in your registration and then do really targeted outreach for the remainder of your promotion of the event to make sure that you're getting the right participants that your program was intended for. During the event, you can ask key questions to ask people about their experience, what they've, how they understand an issue, how much they've learned, if their perspective on something has changed, and these give you really key insights that you can then use as part of your evaluation. And then after the fact, through follow-up surveys or emails, you can ask people to share learnings that they've, after reflecting on the event, to share quotes or photos. And these are all really, really great pieces to help with your reporting and evaluation. So we certainly encourage you to be thinking about that in the context of preparing your event, making sure that you've got, that you've thought about evaluation in advance. So I'm just going to pass it back to Emma to run you through some key questions to think about in designing your work.
Okay, thanks, Kelsey. So we're going to give you an opportunity to work in a breakout again, and to work through some key questions to help you make some decisions about how to transition your programming. These are questions that you've seen throughout the presentation, but two key ones to keep in mind is, what is the goal of the resource or event? And in some cases, you're going to have to invent a new goal, but to begin with, please start with the one you had originally intended. And then the second one is your audience. So we have heard from lots of people that going online can be a great opportunity to reach a new audience, but it's really important that we don't lose that original audience that we know well, that we recognized was important to have our programming, that we built our programming around. So it's really important that right now we think about that in terms of making decisions about how we're going to proceed. So some of the considerations are the age, access to technology, comfort with technology. And then once you've really had a good think about those two things, you've got a bunch of questions here to inform your decisions. So are you going to do live, recorded, or offline? Most cases you're going to do a combination, but try and think of what would be the primary method, what platforms, thinking back to what Kelsey said about working with the platforms that the audience is already comfortable with. We have seen throughout this pandemic that people who we didn't think would be able to do online programming are, so let's not discount anyone, but it is good to start with where people are at, the activities, and then all the more nitty-gritty things, the pre-thinking, how it's going to be facilitated, the different voices, the evaluation pieces, and the supporting elements. These are just common sense things that we think about with program design, but sometimes gets lost in the need to quickly transition. So we just want to center these again today. And I'm going to hand over to Kelsey, who's going to tell us what comes next.
Awesome. So thank you guys. We're going to take another quick moment. We're going to do a little 10-minute breakout session. We're going to throw you into groups of 4 or 5 and just take a moment to talk over one of your pivot challenges, a program that you're trying to bring online. So as soon as you get into your rooms, what we'll do is get you all to quickly introduce yourselves and just do a show of fingers from 0 to 5 of how much you're struggling with the current program. Whoever has the most fingers up gets to present their idea to the group. And then we'll talk through these key questions that Emma just presented. I'll share them in the broadcast so that you have a little reminder. And then we'll hear back from you in about 10 minutes. Okay, so we'll give you a chance to sort of talk through what we've learned today and your own experiences to really help the person that's struggling the most in your breakout group. Okay. Welcome back. For those of you who are jumping back on, in the next 20 seconds or so, we'll have everybody back in the main room here. And I know you guys probably would have benefited from a whole hour to have that conversation together, so I apologize that it was short. But we partly wanted you to have the experience and be able to talk through some of your struggles with your fellow presenters now that we've had a few tips and tricks sort of tucked in our communal tool belts. And with that in mind, I think we've got everybody back. And I want to introduce you to 2 wonderful nature and environmental programmers, Jenny Davis and Jessie Cow, both from the High Park Nature Center. They have always done incredible nature-based programming and have done a really amazing job of pivoting the work that they're doing. So I wanted them to share their story. I'm going to encourage everyone, if you go up in the top corner and switch to speaker view, you will get whichever of them is speaking in the moment highlighted on your screen. So with that, I'll pass it over to Jessie and Jenny.
Hi, everyone. So Jessie and I decided to use our 10 minutes to actually role model what we do at our nature cafe. And we wanted to do this to show you the possibilities that are available to you online, but to also remind you that as nature educators, facilitating groups is what you do. You're actually already good at this, and the screen is just another medium to do this. So let's dive right into our Nature Cafe. Take it away, Jessie.
Welcome to Nature Cafe, everyone. This is the Warp Speed edition. My name is Jessie, and today my nature name is Jewelweed Jessie. And while I continue to chat, I'm going to invite all of you, and I know you've learned how to do this today. You can change your name to be a nature name. Maybe it's an animal or a plant or an insect that you have a relationship with, something you're curious about or something you're in the mood of. So folks can do that. So our intention for the cafe is really just to bring people together to celebrate the fact that nature keeps on flowing and it keeps on teaching, even during a time of a global pandemic. And we acknowledge that so many of us have been spending more time than ever online, and here we are. And so we just wanted to bring people together to build community and to create a space for people to appreciate, learn, and share knowledge about nature. But another big piece is that we want to build tools and give people pathways that they can take with them offline to continue to engage with nature. And the other big piece we want everyone to know is that this is all about participatory learning. So we celebrate that everyone's coming here with really valuable knowledge and different ways of knowing and different ways of looking at things. So we're going to be building on our knowledge together. So don't worry about what you don't know. Now, we've been sitting for a while and learning and taking in lots of information. I'm actually going to invite all of you to stand up away from your screens if that is available to you. We're going to do a super quick movement piece. And I think we're going to start by embodying a white pine. So first, root your feet into the ground and imagine that you're growing your trunk tall and strong. You're supporting all kinds of life in it. And white pines, of course, they are often known as trees that grow taller than the other trees in a forest system. So we're gonna grow our arms up to the sky and give ourselves a really big stretch. You might wiggle your hips a little bit, pretend that you're a young tree swaying in the wind. And white pines, of course, have 5 needles. So we're gonna stretch our fingers up and wide as much as possible. And they're also, they have really beautiful jaunty silhouettes. They often will grow in a way where they're kind of flowing out to one side. So maybe just get a stretch to one side and shake your needles and then stretch out to the other side. Okay, now shake off your white pine. Shake it off, shake it off. We're gonna embody something totally different. And for this one, you're gonna have to get into the smallest possible package available to you. So maybe give yourself a squeeze, get a nice back stretch. You can be in your chair. And we are going to explode ourselves like a Himalayan balsam seed. So pretend that you're a little seed pod and maybe an animal comes bursting past you. And on 3, we're gonna explode our bodies out as far as possible and pretend that we're dispersing our seeds. 3, 2, 1. Amazing. And now finally, come back together. Click on, just super quickly, we're gonna go to gallery view and think about an animal that you have a relationship with or that you've been witnessing recently. And you're gonna embody this animal, get it into your bones, wear it in your body. And on 3, we're gonna just do the best facial expression that we feel embodies this animal. This was Kelsey's idea. Are you ready? 3, 2, 1. Amazing. If we have more time, we might take a bit of time to debrief and to share what our animals were, or maybe even do some animal forums. But I would love to introduce our special guest today, who is none other than Jenny Davis, who is here to share some things about what she's learned through the process of running online nature events. So I'm going to pass it over to Jenny. And you can go back on speaker view now.
So it was so exciting working in our breakout sessions because I learned that there are lots of cool online programming happening all across Canada. I'm here today to tell you a little bit about my experiences running online events. So here is me. I'm at my computer. I've got my screen in front of me, and here is the person that is leading an incredible nature hike. This happened in real time, the beginning of May during the James Walk, and they were leading an incredible walk. Things were going so well, but then all of a sudden, the wind picked up. It was so loud that I couldn't actually hear what this incredible hike leader was saying. And so I got on my phone and I started madly texting. But they couldn't hear me. And so I learned that for all of the future events that we would run, we needed to have a person on site, that would just handle the messages from me. So when the wind picks up, I just send them a little text, they look at their phone, and then they go over to the videographer and they whisper in their ear, and they might say something like, you need to talk louder, or you know what, when you turn to the left, it's actually better sound quality, or it's really cool when you zoom in on the speaker. So that brings me to another point, because we're talking about COVID-19 times. So if you want to get that really great kind of picture quality with a phone, it would be ideal if the videographer is actually in a bubble with the hike leader, because then they can get really up and close and you don't have to worry at all about breaking any COVID-19 rules. Now, the other thing about this situation is we often partner with incredible Indigenous groups, especially our friends at the Taigon Historical Preservation Society. So sometimes they're actually doing ceremony as part of our celebrations. And this extra person comes in real handy, because then if people that are walking by, because we're just using public spaces, have any questions, then this person can come up and answer all of their questions. It also, we chose to do this as well because especially when there's ceremony, fire potentially, or drumming, there is the potential if you're in a public space that police might come in, and it's really great to have this incredible ally on site that can just let the police know what's happening and take all of that stress away from your presenters. Now, another tool we've learned is that if you are using a pre-recorded video to help people connect with nature, it could be, you know, you go out to the park nearby and you record the sound of bird calls in the morning and you want to show that during your event. Well, it's nice to use the chat box to help get people engaged in that video, because what we're really trying to do with all of this work is to try to melt the screen away. The screen is just this medium, but we want to dissolve it. So if you use the chat box, rather than having to say, rather than having to stop your video, you can actually use the chat box to pique people's interest. Like, hey, keep your eye out. A red-winged blackbird is going to cross the screen any second now. And then all of a sudden, their eyes are open and like, oh my goodness, that's what a red-winged blackbird looks like. So that's another cool tip. And then one thing that I really love about working with Jessie and the Nature Cafe, and I know Kelsey already mentioned this, is this idea of offering invitations to move away from this screen. And just before this workshop, my husband and I came up with this acronym. I don't know if you can see it, it's LEAVE. So leave experiences away from virtual environment. So I think as our job, whether you're not a nature educator or you work in a museum, is how can we get people to take a good amount of time away from the screen. And an example of this is at the Nature Cafe. One time we had Lorraine Johnson, an incredible wildflower expert. And then we took 10 minutes. We asked people to go outside, look through their window or be on their balcony and actually get up close to just one flower in their yard or through their window and draw it from the perspective of a bee. So, and then when you come back, all of a sudden you get to show these pictures, and seeing someone's hand drawing experience actually puts humanity back into the screen, and it really reduces the fatigue. And lastly, I just need to address this because we all talked about this screen fatigue, and I think I would challenge that maybe we could all actually lead hikes, like sensory hikes, and just use the phone-in function of Zoom. I've been doing lots of Zoom meetings where I just phone in, and I find my attention is a lot more focused. And especially, I just learned today that many of you have grants about sensory experiences. So the cool thing is we can have people all over in neighborhoods and different parks. And as the facilitator, you can say, all right, I want you to all find something that is moving right now. And it doesn't matter if we're looking at different things. We just all of a sudden we see things that are moving in our environment. And it's just giving them the cues to experience that connection in the moment, in the nature that is right now for them. Anyways, thank you so much, Jessie. I'm gonna pass it back to the Nature Cafe. Woo.
So I wanna just take us through a super speedy lightning version of what one of these away from the screen experiences might look like. So I wanna make it as accessible as possible. So as Jenny said, it could be looking out a window, a balcony, going outside. We usually would take 10 minutes, but today I'm gonna give you maybe a minute and a half I'm gonna give you permission to get up and walk away from your screen. You might bring with you a timekeeping device or just know what a minute feels like in your body. And we're just gonna go to a window or open a door, and we're just gonna tap into our senses, take a deep breath, give yourself a moment to settle in. And the only things I'm gonna give you today, we'd usually give a few things for people to connect to. One of them being a drawing or writing activity, is just tune into your ears and try to pick out the furthest away sound and the closest sound to you. So just a quick auditory sense meditation or sense moment outside. We'll meet you back here in 60 seconds or so. See you in a minute. Welcome back to all of you that are floating back to the screens. Imagine that that was 10 whole minutes. You could really get a good sit spot in. And this is the time when we might hold up our creations if we made a sound map or a bird map, or maybe we were doodling a flower. So we'd all show on our screens. Even if we're off screen, we'd invite people to come on for just a moment. And then we'd use this to go into breakout rooms in small groups, like 2 to 3 people. And we give people some things to hang on to. So how was your experience outside? And we'd also connect it to the theme of the day. So get people sharing and thinking about whatever our theme was, and then come back together for a Q&A session all together. And then we would do a closing circle, which I'm gonna hand back to Jenny to lead.
I know we're out of time, but I just really wanted to say that even for our special events and for the Nature Cafe, we always end with a closing circle. And it can be done, if you have very few participants, it can be done where everyone actually gets to share. For our larger groups, we give them the prompt, share something you learned, share something you liked, or share something that you still have questions about, because we can't learn everything in one celebration. And especially for special events that I think may go over time, I ask people, if you have to leave early, please share gratitude for the hike leader or the presenter. And it's that idea of reciprocity. And it makes it a shared experience. It's just not, you get everything. It's like, no, we're in this together. So I know we don't have time to do that, and maybe it'll be part of the next part, but thank you so much for joining us at the Nature Cafe.
Thank you so much, Jenny and Jesse, for giving us an impromptu lightning speed Nature Cafe right here in within the confines of our event. So you illustrate so wonderfully the last point that we wanted to leave everyone with, which is about preparing your presenter and the facilitation. Thinking about who that person is. You see with Jenny and Jesse, that someone who's passionate and has the magic and is willing to take the time to make sure that the technology works and think of the event from the eyes of the participant, and really make it a wholesome experience for your attendees. And also thinking about, and this is me fully acknowledging that we've kept you a few minutes late here, how long should your event be? If it's information heavy, shorter the better, keep it concise. If it's powerful and experiential and meaningful, maybe you need to make more time for it than you anticipated. And then make sure you break it up in the way that Jenny and Jesse illustrated so wonderfully. Get some fresh air, get some movement. So we're going to share all these key insights with you in our toolkit, which I'm just putting in the chat window right now. And we will also email to all of the participants. I also acknowledge that we reached our meeting capacity and some people weren't able to join. So we are going to share the recording of the event with all of the personal videos removed, and this toolkit with you and all of the registrants tomorrow. So again, we're Park People. Please do stay in touch, and we have offered to stay on for a Q&A. So please do word your questions in the chat window so that we can address them sort of efficiently. And I'm just going to pass it over to Steph to let you know who your TD-FEF contact is across the country and lead us into the Q&A.
Great. So while everyone's submitting their questions, if they have any, into the chat window, just want to highlight again, if you weren't with us at the beginning of the webinar, my name is Stephanie Stana. I have this great role where I split time between Park People and TD Friends of the Environment Foundation, focusing my work in Ontario for TD-FEF. So a lot of familiar names that I finally got to put the faces to today, and I'm really excited about that. So you likely already know your TD-FEF contact, but if you need to jot down the email addresses, they're here for you, and I'm happy to answer any questions related to your grant if you have them. And if you have any questions for our panelists and presenters, you can also add those to the chat box.
So we haven't had specific questions about the TD-FEF grants yet, but maybe Steph, you can speak a little bit to sort of like the funder relationship in terms of pivoting programs and moving them online.
Yeah, so we don't have any hard and fast rules about what organizations need to do right now in terms of pivoting their programming, and we know the COVID situation looks very different across the country, so we're trying to take a case-by-case approach. So whether that means your program looks a little bit different and you're just doing it online, then that's definitely a way to do it. Or maybe you're doing it in person, but it looks a little bit differently because you need to implement some pretty strict social distancing practices, and you might need to pivot your funding a little bit to accommodate some extra expenses like gloves and hand sanitizer and things like that. So I just encourage you to reach out to your regional manager or coordinator in your region, and we'll be happy to discuss your specifics.
Thank you. Jessie and Jenny, if you don't mind jumping in, we have a question about the best way to use breakout groups with kids.
So I can speak to this quickly. I always make sure that, so we've been lucky in that it's been kind of a nice number, maybe between like 20 and 35, but I always put all the kids together. I leave them in the main room and I'll be present with them. And the reason I'm able to do that is because in the RSVP form that I use, which is just a simple Google document, I ask folks if they're going to be present with kids, and I can kind of keep an eye on that. If there's a lot of people, I can always ask them to change their name so that it makes it easy to discern who is there with kids and who isn't, because sometimes people don't have their videos on, or the kids are maybe running around in the background. And that way I can keep people together in one room and help facilitate that. So if it's going to be a big event like this, you'd want to have multiple facilitators who are able to be present in those rooms, or just to think about, yeah, what makes sense for you.
Hi. Hello.
Yeah, did you have a direct question?
This is Bucket and Shovel Mike. Because what we do is we go out and plant trees up in Richmond Hill. And of course, we're waiting to see what's going to happen with the schools in the fall to see whether we can actually do planting this year. Are you going to have some more programs like this? That's a question.
Are you speaking to the High Park
Kelsey,
Nature Cafe?
probably. Kelsey, you look like to be the main chair here. Are you going to have more programs like this? I came in late, so I didn't.
Absolutely. So this, we're going to share, I acknowledge that there was a capacity issue with not everyone being able to connect directly. So we will be sharing all the information from today. In terms of a secondary event, we don't have one planned, but we'll certainly share great examples of upcoming events through folks like the High Park Nature Cafe. There's across the country all kinds of great people doing wonderful programming, and I think what we would really encourage you to do is take away everything you can from our toolkit and what we've shared today, and then sign up for lots of great events and experience them and take notes, kind of peek behind the curtain of how they organized it and what worked well and what didn't, and you can apply that as your own learning as you're finalizing plans for moving your programming online. And I know Jessie and Jenny did share their the link to the High Park Nature Center upcoming activities in the chat, and I'll also share that around in our follow-up email to all of the registrants, including those that weren't able to sign on.
Thank you. Okay, I will probably go on off now, but I look forward to seeing your report on this meeting and whatever other information you send. I've got a Zoom meeting with my Rotary people who put in some money along with TD for this coming year's planting. So I have to talk to them and see whether they're up for supporting us this year as well. So I got a few ideas.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
There was one last question. Maybe if Jenny and if you wanted to speak to it again, just about dealing with data and internet speeds when you're trying to do innovative online engagement.
Yeah, so I was chatting with Reed but I'm glad to do it with everyone. So some organizations have purchased portable hotspots. So they're basically like a little modem that you put in your backpack, and it gives you the Wi-Fi capacity. At the High Park Natures, I don't actually know how much they cost. At the High Park Nature Center, we just don't have money to buy that. So we have just been relying on people's personal phones and then paying that person for the extra data. It typically takes between 2 to 3 gigabytes for like an hour to a 2-hour virtual hike. And someone else had asked, like, how do you improve the sound and video quality? So what we do for our virtual hikes is we ask that everyone that is on the Zoom meeting, they turn off their video as well as mute themselves. But we've found that if everyone turns off their video, it actually helps take up less bandwidth. I don't actually know, I'm a dinosaur actually, so I don't actually know if that's true, but it's what we do. And we've had, up to 77 people on our virtual hikes. And I haven't actually had any feedback that, the sound quality has been bad. And I've also had people, everyone is really considerate and has been really great about keeping their video off. And it also means that if we're recording the event, we don't have to worry about any privacy concerns as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Jenny and Jessie and Naz and Emma, for sharing all of your insights, and for all of you that were able to join today and support each other through your smaller conversations and start to talk to figuring out how to apply some of this learning to your program pivots coming up. So thanks again for joining. Thanks for letting us keep you a few minutes late. And we'll follow up with all of the toolkit and recording as we promised, as well as any links that were shared in the chat window. So thank you everyone so much, and go out and enjoy a nice breath in nature if you can. Take care.